Welcome to TSRA-2A Ricochet. Your host is Andy Turner, the Legislative Director podcast of the Texas State Rifle Association. We'll discuss your 2A rights, legislation, hunting, competition, you name it. Join in and be part of the discussion. Now here's your host, Andy Turner.
Welcome back to TSRA-2A Ricochet. I am your Legislative Director, Andy Turner, and today we have part two with Carl Wren. If you did not see last week's episode, you definitely should take a look. Carl's given you quite a bit to think about and some good practical advice, I think, and he's going to continue on. Carl Wren is got a lifetime of various experiences, and really take a look at the first part of this, and you'll get his brief biography of all of the things that he's done. But again, also remember that before we get into what Carl's got to say, remember that early voting starts February 14th. And it runs up until the end of the month. And then election day is March 1st. If you don't know who to vote for, go to TSRA-PAC.com. All of our endorsed or graded, well, if you're endorsed, you got a grade. But you may not have been endorsed, but you got a grade. If you don't know what district you're in, there's a link there for you to find it out. And I got an email after this went up, Carl, actually, and one of my friends came up with a great answer for this, and they were like, "I can't believe you endorsed this rhino," and I won't name the name, and I'm like, so the R in TSRA only stands for rifle, it doesn't stand for Republican? So we endorsed based on who has endorsements were based on who has a proven history with us, is proven to that they'll be there for us. And if you see a Q after the grade, that means it's qualified, means that they've never held a legislative office before, but they answered the survey, there's been discussions or research done. This was a lot of work, and kudos to Tara from NRA-ILA for doing a heck of a lot of work on this. So we worked together, and I think we worked together pretty well. But anyway, that information is up there, and as of the airing of this, we should be right up against early voting, unless, I don't know, technology lets us down. So anyway, with that, Carl, welcome back.
I'm glad to be back.
Excellent. What you got for us today?
Well, we got through, some of the advice I was given to people with carry permits. A lot of the training that I do is short courses and private lessons for people that have their carry permit or are close to the carry permit level, or they're carrying without a permit, but they want to know, what do I really need to know? What do I really need to do to be well prepared to defend myself? Right. And, the classic answer is, well, you should take a $500 16-hour class from a big name national traveling trainer. That's good. That's all good. Realistically, I started restructuring my classes to be 2, 3, or 4 hours. And if you take 4 of my 4-hour classes, you get the same material that you would get from a 16-hour class from one of the national trainers. But the difference is there's a lot of people that don't have $500 in 16 hours, and particularly now have the ammo to get through to do that kind of training, and certainly to practice like that on a regular basis. And so really kind of what I wanted to talk about today was some practical advice for regular gun owners that want to bridge that gap, right? Maybe you can shoot 100 rounds a month, and you've got some time, you could dry fire at home, and you could afford maybe to take a class every 3 or 4 months if it was a 2, 3, or 4 hour class, or just go shoot a competition, right? To spend one Saturday afternoon or Saturday morning shooting a competition. Let's identify some things that the regular permit holder can do to keep their skills sharp, or to get their skills up to a level beyond the state minimum. So that's kind of my focus, at the risk of sounding all advertising right? We did write a book. My co-instructor and I, John Dobb, we wrote this book, and it's available from Amazon as an ebook. You can buy it from Amazon. If you go to krtraining.com, you can get a copy autographed by both authors for less money than it will cost you to order the print book from Amazon. And we do have a large print version for those that need the large format, right, like 8x10 with larger print and bigger graphics. So lots of options, and I think a lot of people would find it interesting. It's been well received over the last couple of years. It's been well reviewed. So you might give it a look. It's a little bit different from a lot of the books that are marketed to only the, well, if you're not willing to shoot, 1,000 rounds a month, then we're not, we got nothing for you. My focus, again, is on regular people and making small steps that they can do to get better than where they are now with a reasonable amount of investment of money and time.
Cool. All right. Okay, well, that having taken your classes, we talked about this last episode, but for anybody that missed the last episode, so Carl and I became friends last session when he called me up and was like, what the heck is going on here? And of course, I never mind those questions, as you all know. And we started having some really in-depth conversations about some of the legislation that was going on. And I gained a lot of insights from him. And then I found out he was an LTC instructor. And then I found out he was all the things with his background. And so as soon as session was over, and the minute permit list was signed, I was out on one of his ranges shooting for my LTC, and thank God, because yes, go back to the last episode. There's a story there, but anyway, so I called Carl and I said, listen, I'd like to talk more about LTCs. We've talked about why, we talked over and over again why. I think, and many people are telling everybody that the LTC program is the better option than permitless carry. Permitless is a wonderful thing, and as I've said 100 times, I really fought hard for it. So did other pro 2A groups, because it does get us out of the business of asking permission. But that said, the reason that I wanted Carl on here is because, as he said last episode, ignorance of the law is no excuse. And while we have gone over, I don't know, Carl, if you saw it, but I did the Texas Law Shield, I did a whole episode on a deep dive on permitless versus LTC using their law guide. So now we're at the point where, okay, so Carl and I are talking about now, okay, I've got my LTC, I passed the class, I've got it in the mail, and I've got my gun. Carl talked last time about holsters, which is a really important thing that people don't always understand. I certainly didn't understand all of the things until I got with Carl. And certainly there are very good LTC instructors around the state. This is mine. So, and frankly, of all the LTC instructors I've ever met, defensive classes, I've taken tactical classes, he is the most knowledgeable. And so when he agreed to be on the show, I was like, yes, win. So you have things. Tell us things.
Well, I do. Part of the book that we wrote was to start with a clean sheet of paper and say, look, the state standards, and let's be honest here, okay? Because I was around, I took the very first instructor class that DPS offered, was around as an active firearms trainer. Before there was LTC in Texas, I had been teaching classes for gun owners, teaching gun skills and handgun skills for several years prior to that, which was maybe one of the few people that actually had a program in place before we had concealed carry at all, right? So when you look at the standards, those of us that have been in this a long time will remember the fight was between, do we make the standards the answer to the question, what do you need to be well prepared to defend yourself in a real situation, versus what is the minimum that we need to require to make it safe for a person to carry a loaded gun with them in public. And the gap between those two things is quite large. And the Texas permit test is a reasonable test But in the grand scheme of things, if you want to laugh or maybe be sad, you can look up my friends John Johnston and Chris Baker from Lucky Gunner. They did a video where John shot the license to carry permit test for Texas blindfolded and passed it. Blindfolded.
I don't think I could do that.
Well, John is a master class level shooter, and he's extremely skilled. And I think, Chris gave him some help and kind of squared his shoulders up to the target and said, the bad guy's that way.
Right. Yeah. Well, that would be helpful. Yes.
But, right, the whole thing, I mean, almost everyone that I train on a private basis, including people that have never picked up a gun before, I can get them to the 90% standard on the license to carry test with 2 hours and 100 rounds of training. Right. And I joke with them and say, oh, great. Now you're able to go teach this class to the general public because 90% is all the instructors have to do. In the real world, when you step outside the sort of NRA, USCCA, state permit qualification program, you find there's a completely different viewpoint on what standards are and what skills are needed. And so I sort of wanted to expose people to that. If you aren't aware of those things, kind of want to just introduce you to realistic standards beyond the state minimum. That a lot of people, and I complained about this for a long time, that I actually appreciate permitless carry because one of the problems that we've had with license to carry is people can come in and shoot what appears to be an A+ or an A- grade on the state shooting test and mistakenly get the idea that they are great shooters and they don't have any other yardstick to measure their performance by to really understand, no, this is okay shooting, but it's not great shooting. And even is it relevant to self-defense? For example, there's a program called the Force Science Institute, and they go around the country and they teach analysts that analyze shootings for expert witnesses, for prosecutors, for defense attorneys, for police investigators. Their vision is that their measurements that they've made of working with untrained shooters and assuming they can measure what they can do, right? At 21 feet, an untrained shooter can pretty much point the gun at the target and pull the trigger 3 or 4 times in 1 second and hit the target with most of those shots. Okay, so that's 4 shots in 1 second. The license to carry shooting test at 21 feet at 7 yards is 5 shots in 10
Wait. Say that again. The license to carry at 21 feet at 7 yards. Okay, I'm sorry.
Right. So your average untrained criminal, 4 shots in 1 second.
Uh-huh.
Okay. The license to carry test, 5 shots in 10 seconds.
Wow. So
okay. Someone that had an unlimited size magazine could fire 40 shots at you, shooting 4 shots a second, while you're standing there trying to shoot 5 shots in 10 seconds. Okay. So the time limits on the license to carry test are glacially slow compared to the speed at which real things actually happen. Mm-hmm. If you look at, there's a lot of junk on YouTube, but there's a lot of gold on YouTube as well. I'm a big fan of trainer John Correa and his Active Self-Protection YouTube channel, where he every day posts a video of an actual incident. In none of those incidents do you see people shooting 5 shots in 10 seconds. You see 5 shots in 3 seconds. Even if they're under control and they're aimed fire and they're shooting with precision, the real world speed and accuracy that's required does not look like our license to carry test. And I am not, absolutely not advocating that we raise the standards for the carry permit test. Right. I advocated for permitless carry. People should have the option to carry whether they have any skill at all, as long as they're safe to have the gun in public, because all they may need to be able to do to save their life is get the gun out and point it toward the bad guy, even if they can't focus on the sights due to poor vision or shaky hands or whatever. At 5 yards, generally, literally, someone blindfolded can get their hits in a decent area if they have the gun with them. And if we deny them the right to carry because we've had artificially high standards, that doesn't help most people. And so, however, those that choose to be armed should understand that they would be better served with a higher level of skill. And so that's my point. So I don't want people to think I'm advocating for higher training standards.
No.
Not mandatory government training standards. I am advocating that individuals care enough about their own lives and their own safety to train to a realistic level. And it doesn't mean that you have to take a 16-hour course and $500 and 500 rounds of shooting. What I'm going to explain is there's some things that you can do to get past the carry permit level that will help you in some cases that literally don't cost any money at all. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And, you were talking about the test, and I was just remembering, because I took my test in the middle of June, something like that. And we had been outside, and it was, I don't know, June in Central Texas. So,
right. So it was 175 degrees.
Yes. And so, and Peter, who can accommodate to all the heat and the humidity, and it doesn't bother him. And by the time we got to my task, because we talked about this last episode, what I had to go through to figure out what my carry piece was, and what was appropriate for me and useful to me. And by the time we got to the test, I qualified no problem, but by the time I did the last few shots on the test, I was literally trying not to fall over it because the heat, and it was taking over my brain, and I had already passed the test.
Right. You had the state minimum at the 7-yard line. You had enough points to pass.
Yes.
Which is true for pretty much everybody that shoots the test.
Yeah. But had it been a cooler day, I think, would have been, I would have shot even better. And in point of fact, we go off to the range and, I try to remember everything Carl teaches me, but I'm still not, and I think Carl would be loath to criticize me on my own show, but I think he would agree with, yes, I am interested in more education, and I need more education. I should have it. If you were going to carry a dangerous object, it's like this, right? When you're old enough to learn how to drive, you don't just get in a car and turn the key. You got to take a class. You got to have practice. You got to have education. And and what did our parents tell us? The car is basically a large murder weapon. So you have to do all those things and then pass tests. And so now, it's the same thing. You can't just take the test and go, okay, I'm a great driver now, because you're not, right? You have to go out, you have to practice this, that, and the other thing. And so, and at TSRA, we are always all about, everything we do is always all about safety first. And the safest way to be a defensive carrier is educate yourself. Don't just take the LTC class. Carl's mentioned some videos, there's a book, there's I'm sure there are other books, but there are loads of methods. Please don't just get your LTC, shove it in your wallet and start carrying. Go to the range, learn things. I am not happy unless my groupings are a certain size, and basically, large apples is my personal,
That's a good standard, a fist.
Yeah.
The first drill in our book, and I hate to sound like I'm plugging the book, but we put a lot of work into the book. The back of the book, we have 10 drills. We call our top 10 drills. If you go to blog.krtraining.com and you search for top 10 drills, that section of the book is free on the blog.
Cool.
So you don't have to buy my book to get the information, right? You can look up the drills. And, one of the first drills that's on the list is the classic. It's called the 5x5 or the 5x5x5 or the 5 to the 4th or 5 to the 5th. There's a bunch of variations on it, but it's pretty simple. It's at 5 yards, which is roughly a car length. You need to be able to put 5 shots into a 5-inch circle in 5 seconds. So that's considerably more difficult than the Texas carry permit test. But if you think about it, this came from a young lady named Gila Hayes, who is one of the instructors at the Firearms Academy of Seattle. Her husband, Marty Hayes, is the guy that started the self-defense insurance business, basically the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. They were the first company in the legal insurance business for self-defense. And in that whole industry, all the other competitors to them, none of them existed before Marty started this stuff. And so they've been innovators in the industry for a long time. But Gila's test is very simple. You can start with your gun at the ready position. If you're more skilled, you can start with your gun in the holster with your hand on your gun, or you can start by drawing from concealment. And it just depends on your skill level and what the range will let you do. But the easiest thing to do is take an NRA B8 bullseye center, which has a 5.5-inch circle. It's a black bullseye, and stick one of those up on the range. And there are free shooting timer apps that you can get for your phones, for iTunes, iOS, and Android.
I had no idea.
Yeah, there's free apps, right? And so, anytime you practice, once you've passed the carry permit test, every drill you practice should have a timer. You should have a target and a timer so you can measure both your speed and your accuracy, because both matter. Both matter.
Yeah, because if you're going to shoot somebody in self-defense, you want to make darn sure you're hitting what you're aiming at.
Well, and also if you're late, then it doesn't help, right? That typically you don't know that you need to use your gun until they've started their attack, which means you're already behind. Yeah. Which means you need to be able to get the gun up to the eye level, find the sights, and get the hits quickly, right? So if you only want one drill to practice out of my little talk here, right? The 5 shots, 5 inches, 5 seconds at 5 yards. That's probably the single best drill I can recommend to you. Then it's considerably more difficult than the carry permit test. However, it's much more realistic. Number one, and one of my complaints all along, those of us who've been in this for a long time, the original Texas carry permit target that DPS used was far, far, far better than the B-27 that we use now. The B-27 is a 1950s era target that was a combination of a much better older target called the Colt Police Silhouette and a bullseye target. And if you go to blog.krtraining.com, I have quite a bit of information about the history of handgun training there, and an article with material provided to me by Tom Gibbons and a trainer from Indiana that specializes in the history of target development. The bottom line, the B-27, let me say this. If you hunt, any of the listeners that are deer hunters, you don't aim for center mass on Bambi, right? You aim for the heart and lungs. Well, the heart and lungs on a person are up in the high chest, not in the center of the torso. And so the B-27 essentially teaches you, even if you're shooting the tiny little X-ring, it's teaching you to aim at the wrong spot on a human. And outside of the Texas Carry Permit program, every other training program virtually that exists everywhere in the country, certainly in the private sector, teaches people to shoot in the high chest, the way we used to do with the carry permit program in the first few years before they changed the target. So number one, I would tell you, quit practicing on B-27 targets. If you do that now, stop it. You're better off. It's literally, you're teaching yourself something that is wrong and bad, right? If you want to shoot a bullseye target, shoot the B8 target, which is has a smaller, your goal is to keep all your shots in the black. And if you can do that, then you need to speed up and do that faster, not continue shooting very slowly and shooting the X-ring out of the center. For self-defense training, you need to balance the speed and the accuracy. So you need to learn to do that quicker and quicker. Right? So
with the 5x5x5, you're saying shoot, because to me, and Carl, this is why you're my instructor. So to me, if I'm aiming at something, let's say the X in the middle, right? Right. And I'm hitting it or coming close or whatever, apples, fists, whatever.
Faster.
But I'm hitting what I'm aiming at, and what you're saying, I think, is I should be instead of worrying about the X, I should be moving up to where I would normally be shooting at a defensive position.
No, the B8, if you just imagine, if I stuck a B8 target right here, right, when you're shooting the center of that B8 target, just imagine that black bullseye in the center of human chest. But you're shooting for the center of that bullseye. But the goal is you're not scoring at 8, 9, 10x. It's either in the black bullseye or it's not. And if it's in, it's an acceptable hit. And if it's out, it's not.
Okay.
And so the goal is then, if you can do this in 5 seconds starting from the ready position, then you should try doing it starting with your gun in the holster and your hand on the gun. Because by the time you get the gun to the target, now you have less time. Or most realistically, you should be able to do this starting with the clothes that you're wearing and the gun that you normally carry, and the buzzer goes off and you lift the garment, or if you're open carry, you just grab the gun, whatever. You get the gun to the target and you make the shots, right? So if most people takes them, a good goal is 2 seconds from the start buzzer to the first shot. That's 2 seconds. Well, okay, then you have the remaining 3 seconds to get the rest of your shots off. So you have to shoot faster than 1 shot per second. I understand most ranges don't allow this. That is where dry fire comes in. Dry fire is free. It's an old gun shop myth that dry firing is bad for modern center fire handguns.
That's
right?
true.
There's an entire industry dedicated to selling you products that make dry fire easy and fun. There's the dry fire magazine, which you can put in your gun. There is the cool fire kit. There's the SIRT pistol. There's the laser bullet. There's all manner of toys that will help you dry fire at home. Dry firing is free. It doesn't damage your gun. It doesn't damage your gun. I can't say that enough. That myth refuses to die, but it's absolutely true. If dry firing broke guns, all the world's top shooters would have broken guns, because most of them dry fire 5 to 10 rounds in dry fire for every round they plan to shoot on the range, right? So part of your practice regimen is, if you say, hey, I can afford 50 rounds of ammo. Okay, well, before you decide to go to the range, you should dry fire your gun at least 250 times, practicing lining up the sights, pressing the trigger, and having the gun not move. If you put that work in, then you're not wasting your 50 rounds of live ammo when you go to the range. When you go to the range, you should shoot the 5x5 drill 10 times. And if you can do it in 5 seconds, then you should try to go faster, or you should move the target back from 5 to 7 to 10 yards and work on that. Right? If the range won't let you shoot fast, then move the target back and work on 5x5 at 10 yards, right? Do what you can to develop your skills. At home, nobody's telling you how slow or fast you can go. And so you can speed up the time. And if you have a dry fire magazine or a SIRT pistol or a cool fire kit that allows you to fire more than 1 shot in dry fire, you don't want your dry fire practice to be draw, click, rack, click, rack, click, rack. You've got to find a way to get out of that. And here's what I tell people. I said, look, a dry fire magazine is $100. Well, right now, that's a couple 100 rounds of ammo. But once you've pulled the trigger on your dry fire magazine a couple 100 times, you've paid for it. And now you have a free training toy, right? You buy yourself a $200 SIRT pistol or the fancier ones for $300, right? Think about that in terms of how much ammunition that you've done. Well, okay, you pull the trigger on that gun 1,000 times. Now it's free because you've gotten as much value out of it as you would have gotten out of 1,000 rounds of ammo, except you can do it in your bunny slippers at home in the middle of the night, right? If you can't sleep, get on dry fire, right? You get up in the morning before you get in the shower, right? Pick up your dry fire gun, shoot 10 rounds, set it down, right? And so you can do frequent practice without the hassle of buying ammo, getting in the car, driving to the range, paying the range fee, setting up a target, shooting the gun, right? Pick up your brass, taking your stuff down, driving home, right? That can take an hour, 2 hours. If you spend the money on a piece of equipment that lets you practice at home for free with no ammunition, then you can literally practice 5 to 10 minutes every day. And here's the dirty little secret of skill development. 5 to 10 minutes of dry firing every day will get you much better than, well, I'm going to go to Las Vegas and take a 40-hour class from a big school, and then I don't have to practice for the rest of the year. Actually, that's wrong. That you're better off with 5 to 10 minutes a day for a month, and then maybe you can knock it down to every other day or 3 times a week or even on the weekends or whatever. But once you need frequency of training to build a skill up to the point that you retain it in your head, because your brain throws away things you don't use very often. It pushes them back, puts them in the file cabinet in the closet, and when you need that skill, you don't have it. Self-defense is the thing that you need to have it right under your fingers, because if you knew you were going to need your gun, you could go someplace else and you could avoid the situation, which means that in order for it to be any good for you, then you need to be at the moment's notice when you least expect it. Oh, heck, I need to draw my gun and I need to shoot 5 shots in 5 seconds because I need to make this person stop trying to hurt me, right? Well, if you don't have that skill right at your fingertips, it's just not going to be there for you. You're going to flail and you're going to hope for the best. And a lot of times that works out for people, but sometimes it doesn't. And I think it's better
to move those odds. Yeah, let's narrow those odds, right? So let's know.
Yeah.
Actually, Peter and I were talking about buying one of those laser kits, and because we sit out on the back deck,
Right.
on the back patio,
Right.
and watch TV when the weather isn't cold, which is
Right.
most of the year. And I was like, oh, we could just shoot at the bad guys,
Yeah.
on the TV,
Right.
and
Here's the one problem with that is none of the devices that allow you to shoot more than one shot out of your pistol without racking the slide for each shot,
okay.
none of them will activate the laser bullet products. The dry fire magazine, you get one laser blip, and then the remaining shots don't give you a blip. Same thing for if you get a SIRT pistol, SIRT from Next Level Training, that makes a laser every time. And that's not a real gun and can't fire a real projectile. I'm a big fan of that product because of that, because you don't have to lock it up. You don't have to worry about the kids getting access to it. You don't have to worry about getting stolen, and you don't have to unload your actual carry gun to use it, right? You just set the carry gun down wherever you're going to put it in the gun safe.
Does that come in various
Here's the bad
sizes?
news. It comes in 4 versions, and if your gun isn't like one of those, it costs a fortune for them to develop these things. Here's the thing, though. It doesn't really matter. If the gun's not exactly like your gun, it doesn't really matter. And people find out all these reasons to not do these things, right? The dry fire magazines only come for like full-size Glock and full-size XD and full-size M&P. But if you have one of those guns, then the dry fire magazine is cheaper. The SIRT pistol comes in full-size Glock, full-size M&P, full-size 320, and this little pocket gun that's not exactly like any of the small guns, but it's close enough, right? But it's not perfect. Yes, it's not your sights. The trigger pull's different. Yes, there's all kinds of reasons you can find that it's not going to help you, but ultimately, all those reasons don't actually help you, right? But
you're narrowing your skill set so that when you do go to the range with your carry piece, because you need to be training with your carry piece,
right.
Just a matter of adapting slightly as opposed to having to adapt much.
So you've done the important things. You've learned how to get your garment out of the way. You've learned how to draw your gun from a holster. You've learned how to line up the sights and press the trigger without jerking the gun all over the place and missing, right? And if you do all those things, right, the Cool Fire kit is cool. And the Cool Fire kit does give you a laser dot every time you pull the trigger. But they don't make Cool Fire kits for every gun model on the market because it's just not possible.
Do they make something for, say, a smaller carry piece like mine?
They change their list of what they have all the time.
Okay.
Understand that their primary market for a lot of these things are military units and law enforcement agencies. And so the number of guns that are supported are far more big brand, large sales, Glock 19, M&P, 1911, SIG 320, not as much the small guns. The small guns are not as well supported, but if you own one of the larger guns, having the Cool Fire kit uses CO2, and you fill up their barrel. You take your spring and your barrel out of the gun, and you put their barrel in, and then you fill up their barrel with CO2. You get the bottles. It's a SodaStream bottle from any store that sells a soda.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And you get about 20 shots out of the gun, and every time you pull the trigger, those slide cycles. And if you put the laser bullet in there, it also makes a laser dot. And that gives you your gun, your sights, your trigger with recoil. And it's spectacular. The downside is you have to take your gun apart every time you want to dry fire. And if you're like me and you have more than one gun, then I just took one of my old M&Ps that was kind of worn out from use, and I put the Cool Fire kit in it, and I leave it there. But if you only have one gun, and every time you want to dry practice, you have to unload your gun, you have to put the other stuff in, you're going to find yourself not doing that. That's why I'm a big fan of the SIRT pistol, because it's a totally separate thing. It doesn't require worrying about what if I screw up and let a bullet go out of this thing, because literally it can't fire bullets. All it does, it's a toy that has 2 lasers and a trigger. And so, Laser Light makes some plastic guns that their laser attaches to, and the Laser Light products work quite well for that too. But again, they're not exact copies because of copyrights and licenses and all that. They're not exact. You can find airsoft guns.
But again, refining your skill set. But I do, when you brought something up about disassembling your gun to take the barrel out, put the spring in, and this and that, the other thing, And I can sort of, my father passed on several years ago, but everything I know about gun safety and ballistics and everything is what he taught me. And I can sort of hear him in the back of my head saying, yes, but you should know how to read a schematic and you should know how to take apart your gun completely.
But people are busy and
so you don't want to do that every day, but it is a skill that you should know.
Oh, sure. But then honestly, modern guns, I had one of my assistant instructors, he ran his Glock 10,000 rounds before he cleaned it. And the gun was still running. That the old gun culture was, if you fire 10 rounds out of your gun, you got to tear every piece of it down to the nub and examine it all with an electron microscope and clean it all with a toothbrush. Reality is I clean my guns. If I'm practicing, I clean them when they start malfunctioning, but typically it's 1,000 rounds or more. That you don't have to clean your gun every time you go to the range. And here's the risk. You take your gun apart, you shoot. Then you take your gun apart, then you put it back together, and unless you can shoot out your back door, then you have no way to know that your gun's going to work and you put it back together properly. Right? So in a perfect world, if you're going to shoot a bunch of rounds and then you're going to reload your gun for the street, you should clean your gun at the range, reload your gun at the range, test fire your gun at the range before you leave the range, and then when you put it back in the holster and you leave, then you know for sure that your gun still works. But I know, again, I'm slaughtering sacred cows and getting you more hate mail, but the reality is that you don't have to clean your gun every 100 rounds that you shoot it, right? If you clean your gun every 300 to 500 rounds, most high-quality modern guns are going to run reliably at least 100 rounds, probably 3, 5, even to 1,000 rounds, because if you don't, if you just pay attention to them, they're going to keep running, right? And it just, over cleaning the guns you can break things. You can actually break things and lose springs. There's lots of little parts, right? You take a gun down too far, you end up looking under your desk for that one little spring. The gun won't run without it, but you lost it and it's trapped under a pile of dust bunnies under your desk.
There are whole
Not that that's ever happened to me.
There are whole memes about this spring.
One of my friends who was a former Marine, he said his approach to certain guns that he had is he would take an old bed sheet and he would sit down on it, and then he would have someone drape another bed sheet over his head, and he would take his gun apart, and then if the springs went flying, then the springs wouldn't go very far, and the worst case they would be on the sheet somewhere. And it sounds crazy, but that it sure beats having to order more parts and having your gun sit on the counter waiting for that $2 spring that you had to order from Smith & Wesson that's coming UPS ground, and it comes 5 days later.
Right.
Not that that's ever happened to me, right?
Now, I have to say, because my best friend is a Marine Corps veteran. I have so many, they are never former Marines.
Oh, right.
Okay, so I'm just saying, don't anybody email me because I know better. So
that's on me. I apologize.
No. But I think that the rule of thumb is, like, if I was shooting my dad's guns, then that might be a thing where I would want to clean them more often. But my guns have been manufactured in the last 25 years. Yeah. And so for those guns, they don't need to be cleaned as often. So I'm glad you actually picked that apart, because it does live on because we listen to our parents, right? And so when Daddy says, hey, you went to the range, clean your gun, and I only shot 50 rounds, whatever.
Well, there are people out there that enjoy taking their guns apart and putting them back together, right? You sit in front of the TV and you watch your favorite John Wayne movie and you take the gun apart and clean it, the smell of Hoppy's number 9 and all that great stuff.
Oh, yeah, that's a thing.
It can be its own ritual, but if you're busy, and that's really the focus, my focus on my advice is, look, you got kids, you got family, you got job, you got dogs, you got whatever else, you got other things you want to do, and all I want you to do is dry fire 5 minutes a day. Practice drawing your pistol from the way that you carry it. The gun that you actually carry, practice moving your garment out of the way, drawing the gun, getting the sight picture, and pressing the trigger. And if buying a SIRT pistol or a laser light gun or something will make it easier for you, right? You can, and here's the, the last episode, I ragged on cheap holsters. Well, this is a case where if you've got a dedicated dry fire gun and it doesn't fit your regular holster, spend $30 on a cheap, outside the waistband holster that fits the dry fire gun that you have, and just leave it with the dry fire gun, right? And then you don't have to change all your gear out, right? I would rather, if you buy the SIRT pistol and maybe it's an M&P model and you don't have an M&P, well, buy a cheap Phobos, M&P outside the waistband holster.
But it's going to
so that if you want to practice, well, the Phobos won't. Phobos is low quality Kydex, and it's the Phobos paddle holsters are cheap and they're not ideal for real world carry, but for the kind of practice you're going to do, you slip it over your belt, put it on, do some work, right? It's all a trade-off. Make it easier on yourself. And even if your training is less than perfect, if you're just doing it, it's the frequency of the training. You don't need to go shoot 500 rounds. You need to shoot 50 good rounds, maybe twice a month, or 100 rounds once a month. But if you're not doing the dry work, if you're not doing the prep work, not doing the dry fire, then you're pretty much almost assuredly wasting your money, because live fire training, generally, if we're doing something wrong, it makes the thing we're doing wrong worse. The flinching and the blinking and the slapping the trigger, it's easier to fix all that stuff in dry fire without ammunition at home for free than it is, think of it like homework in the test. Your range trip should be a test. You should have a list of drills. I have 100 rounds. I'm going to spend them this way. I'm going to shoot these drills, and my goal is to achieve this performance, right? And then you should be dry firing those drills at home, so that when you go to the range, you're simply validating all the dry fire work that you did. You don't go to the range with the only 100 rounds that you have for that month to discover that you suck. Then how do you fix that? Right? How do you fix that? Right. Well, if you only could afford to find 100 rounds and you only had time for one range trip, then that you haven't put in. Does that make sense? I mean, people don't do this, but they don't do the free things that they should do to make the range part valuable to them. And particularly now, you can't find ammo, you can't afford ammo. There's a million reasons to learn how to dry fire. I'll plug a couple of books. I know we're getting tight on time here at the end. A young lady named Annette Evans has a great book called The Dry Fire Primer. That is a great intro book for people that have never ever considered dry firing or doing dry fire practice before, or they've been trained to do old school dry fire practice where you shoot at a snail's pace and you rack the slide for every shot. That has diminishing returns after a while for defensive pistol practice. So Annette's book is really good. The other one is Ben Steger, Stoeger, and his pro shop is located in Austin, and he has a book called Dry Fire Reloaded, and that teaches you how to do higher level dry fire practice. But a lot of people, I think Annette's book would be the entry point, and it explains what you need and how to do it and how to get value out of limited dry fire practice as part of your training routine. Because, it all comes down to, here's an analogy I give my students. Say, look, I can hand you a tenor saxophone and I can teach you to play the C major scale in the tenor saxophone. And in 2 hours, I can get you at the end of the 2 hours where you can probably get through the C major scale without a lot of coaching from me, maybe a reminder, here's the fingering for this note or that note. But if I tell you a year from now, I'm going to wake you up and toss you out of bed at 3 o'clock in the morning, hand you the tenor saxophone, and you have to play the C major scale with no coaching from me, or you're going to die, right? And you don't practice the tenor saxophone between class day and the time I shake you out of bed.
Right, you're gonna die.
You're gonna die. Yeah. And if you just picked up the horn once a day and played one C major scale, and that's all you did, you don't have to be great at everything, right? Most self-defense is 3 to 7 yards, being able to shoot a 4 to 6 inch target in the high chest. If you can do that, if you can get the gun up and you can hit that from 3 to 7 yards, that's going to solve most of your shooting problems. If you can do that out to 15 yards and shoot that 5-inch circle, well, Jack Wilson in White Settlement, he made a 12-yard headshot, and that's, if you need motivation, well, that's what he was able to do.
Yeah,
right?
and I love that.
Go ahead.
I'd love to have you on another episode where we talk about that, where you kind of, because you parsed that for me when I did my class with you. And it was an interesting discussion about, exactly, what happened and why Jack's gun. You have comments on that gun that he used that go to. It was a great lesson, and I'd love to have you on another show where we talk about that.
Well, I would defer to Jack and let him. I would tell you interview him about it.
I would love to.
Straight from the source, since he's still around and is certainly able and willing to talk about it. But I mean, what he did, that was an excellent feat of defensive pistol skill by any measure, right? And that was above and beyond the standard level of reasonable standards that a regular person should have, perhaps. But again, if you just have the one drill, if you just start working on the 5x5 and practice drawing, practice getting your gun out, get it out of the holster and up on the target. And a 2-second draw time is a great start. And if you find it difficult, then going back to the previous episode, then maybe you need to reassess, I can't get the gun out of my pocket because my pants pockets are the opening of my pants pocket is too small. Okay, well, if you want a pocket carry, go look for pants that have bigger openings, right? If the gun is so small that you can't get your both hands on it or whatever, right? Then you start looking for, okay, what gear changes can I make that makes sense? Do I need to carry inside the waistband instead of carrying my pocket, right? That sort of thing. But at some point, the criminal's not going to wait because your draw is too slow. They're not going to wait for you to catch up.
Right.
They're going to go the speed they're going to go, and you're either fast enough or you're not. And there's the infinite argument is, well, no matter how fast your draw is, someone can make the argument, well, you could or should be faster. Stick a pin in the 2-second draw, and if you can do that, then get to the 1.5 second draw. And if you can do that, then there's probably other skills you need to work on. But the one skill that's not in the carry permit class that people need is drawing the gun from the holster that they're wearing or however they're wearing it. That should have been part of the test and the class, and it's not. And so just because you shot 90% on the carry permit test, again, if you don't have that presentation of the gun from the holster part in place, then you don't really have the full picture and the full skill set. You're missing probably the most important.
We want to make sure you guys are all safe and you're taking, if you are in a defensive, highly traumatic situation, that you're hitting what you need to be hitting. And
right. And what I'm saying is nothing new, from the 1960s all the way to the current day. Everybody that doesn't teach state required classes, that teaches voluntary, you come to class because you actually want to learn and not because the state forced you to. What I'm telling you is nothing new. This is something we've all been saying for decades upon decades. So, if this is the first time you're hearing it, well, welcome to the club, welcome to the team. But those are the things that the standards that have existed in that world for the last 50 years. They're good standards. And like I said, we have a list of the 10 drills in our book of some things. We have a free ebook that you can get that's even full of more drills, standards, qualifications, and tests. And once you start looking for drills to practice beyond the state carry permit drill, there's no shortage of them from great sources and no shortage of, good ideas for good standards. So, use that. But if you don't get anything out of this, it should be practice with purpose, do some dry practice where you go to the range, set your standards at reality-based standards, and don't worry about the state standards because they're so low as to be not relevant for defensive handgun for the most part.
I mean, it'll keep people safe. And that's the purpose of the test. I mean, you started this show out saying that the purpose of the test is to allow people to carry and to have enough knowledge to do it safely. But if you are carrying...
The greatest tragedy would be someone mistaking the state standards for equivalent to realistic standards for self-defense and then dying in a situation because the skills they needed were not part of the curriculum that were in the course. And,
but we
walk around thinking they knew that they were good enough when in reality, they weren't. And so that's, I'm just trying to help get people calibrated.
Right, and we're not, and Carl did say this at the beginning, and I'm going to reiterate this in case anybody tuned in late, but we are not advocating for any kind of change on that test. That
No.
test has got a specific objective, and the specific objective is to keep you and other people safe if you choose to carry. That said, if you are choosing to carry, it's because you want to protect yourself. You want to be able to defend yourself in a highly charged situation where you are clearly threatened. I mean, there's a whole standard, and you guys have your LTC, you already know what that standard is. But let's make sure that, that you win. Then the bad guy loses. And that's what Carl's after here is this is not a commentary on the test because the test does what the test should do. Now, we need to get y'all and me, I'm right up there with you, able to accurately defend yourself. And what Carl's given us today is some free ways to develop those skills.
Let me go out on a bigger limb.
Okay.
You can disavow my statement as not speaking for TSRA because I don't. But I would tell you that in the era of permitless carry, that someone that took, if they only have the 4 to 6 hours and the money to do the permit class and all of the other stuff and the fees and everything, from a self-defense, preparedness, being ready to defend yourself standpoint, they would be better off taking the DPS book and reading the DPS law book and then spending the remaining hours and money doing what I'm recommending, which is getting your handgun skill up to that 5x5x5 minimum level, working from the holster, because then do the license to carry stuff later. But in terms of what are you going to need in the Walmart parking lot or in the alley or in the driveway, what are you going to need to actually survive that situation? I firmly believe that learning how to carry, having the gun, learn how to get the gun out, learn how to get realistic quality hits. That's what's going to get you through more so than the carry permit class itself. The carry permit class is a nice to have, but in terms of the essential piece of it, you're better off getting formal instruction to meet my standard, or at least doing your own research on YouTube. And YouTube videos are free. There's tons of stuff that's free. Try to get as close to that level as you can on your own. Then when you go take the carry permit test, it's all sprinkles on the cupcake.
Yeah, it's not even the icing, it's sprinkles.
It's the sprinkles.
Okay, so we need to wrap this up because I think we're over our
I'm sure I'm bad about that. I apologize.
Yeah, I forgot to watch the clock. So guys and gals, if you've got questions or comments about Carl's tips, techniques, advice, I'm all about it. You know how to reach me, Andy Turner at TSRA.com. And
you can send hate mail to me at REHN at krtraining.com. I do answer all my hate mail. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
So, and your website is krtraining.com, correct?
Correct. And the blog is blog.krtraining.com. And that's where most of the tests and the drills and all that stuff is.
Yeah. So anyway, let me know if you want Carl back to talk about something else. Let me know. I'm always looking for new ideas for the show, and Carl's always fun to hang out with, at least for me, and for my husband. But anyway, yeah. So let us know, and don't forget to vote. Your vote matters. I've literally had people say to me, "Well, I don't vote because my spouse's vote is the opposite party and it cancels each other out." I am telling you, I have seen elections won and lost by less than 200 votes. I've seen small elections won and lost in double digits. So when you talk about the House of Reps and the Senate and the governor, vote. Just do your thing and vote. And again, you can go to the PAC page, TSRA-PAC.com, and find out who we've endorsed or what grades we've given. And if you don't know what district you're in, we've got the link there. Carl, thank you so much for coming out. And
thank you for having me. And hopefully I didn't stir up too much controversy.
No. It's good because somebody else may come along and say, well, I watched Carl's show, but here's what I think, and I'm all here for it. So, and if they feel that strongly and they're qualified, then maybe we'll have both of you on the show. We'll have that debate. It could be interesting. You never know.
Sure.
So, but anyway, thank you very much for your time and your assistance and your instruction and all of that. And ladies and gentlemen, I will see you next week on TSRA 2A Ricochet. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.
You've been listening to TSRA 2A Ricochet with your host, Andy Turner, the Legislative Director Podcast of the Texas State Rifle Association. And until next time, you can find out more at tsrapac.com and tsra.com.